and this is the news, that the EFF under Julius Malema wants to partner with MK and other progressive parties to have a 2/3 majority in South Africa. Now, it doesn't matter what the polling says. What the intention is to have these progressive false parties, i.e. communists, have a 2/3 majority and make this another Zimbabwe. So on one hand, that is a bit concerning that all of these parties want to gang up against, minorities like us. But on the other hand, I think it's quite telling as to why Jacob Zuma and Ace Magashule didn't join the EFF. Because if this was the plan all along, it makes far more sense to have different parties ganging up, grouping into each other, than one party winning 20%.
Well, is it though? Because this actually raises some very important questions, and that is, Julius Malema had his 43rd birthday on the weekend. My God, I can't believe he's getting old. But whilst he's getting older, he's certainly not getting any maturer. He still sprouts the same communist bullshit that he always has. And the interesting part about it is he actually says the coalition government with the ANC, it's actually been really, really difficult. And he says, we have to get the ANC's buy-in and we have to persuade them to what we want. And so I'm actually going to use his exact analogy. He says, we want to expropriate land, we want to insource jobs, and we want to cut the tenders, and the ANC don't want to. So he says they've been really tough to work with them because they kind of have to come to an agreement and they can't. So why would you want national coalitions when the simple coalitions you have now, where Julius says himself, we're not the majority, so we can't just dictate our will, isn't really working that well?
Well, I think it's electioneering time, so they have to say what are the big projects that could possibly happen should they win, X% of the votes. So for now, Julius is not saying going into bed with the ANC. Interestingly enough, he doesn't consider the ANC to be a progressive, i.e. communist party. He's talking about the MK party under Zuma, he's talking about the ATM, and he's talking about ACT under Ace Magashule and the PAC. These are the progressive parties that must win 2/3 of the vote. It is not with the ANC, which I find quite interesting, because according to him and according to those people, it looks like the ANC under Cyril is not progressive enough. Whereas we, as white people and as a minority, think Cyril is the most committed socialist the ANC has ever produced since 1994.
Yes, now the reason this is also very interesting is that what Juju actually says is he says, Cyril under the ANC took a resolution in 2017 to expropriate land without compensation. He says he's obviously gone back on it over time. He says this isn't an ANC issue. It's a Cyril issue, according to him, which is something that we've said many, many times. Just because you come up with all this bullshit about different factions in the ANC doesn't make it true. The ANC is still the ANC. But what Juju's saying is he's saying, all the non-progressive forces in the country are all captured by the Oppenheimers, according to him, which obviously by extension also includes the Ruperts and the Murdochs. And those guys are all captured. Even Cyril's bought and paid for. And he says the reason he isn't bought and paid for and why he's public enemy number one is because he's not a stooge of the Oppenheimers.
Which is maybe the case, but if you think about it, the Oppenheimers are funding Action SA, they are funding Rise Mzansi, they haven't funded the DA, they did in the past. They're funding 3 or 4 different political parties, the Oppenheimer. And I think what the Oppenheimers want to achieve is to eat as much as the ANC vote as possible across these divergent different parties. But also, the Oppenheimers are not they're one family, but they don't agree on the same thing. So you got one person in the Oppenheimer family paying for this party, the other person's paying for that party or donating to that party. So it's not a coherent strategy. And my sources say the Oppenheimers don't really agree on the best way forward for this country other than the ANC must go. But what the Political Party Funding Act has shown and has given ammunition to Julius Malema, because now that all the funding is public, other than the ANC's, of course, now Julius can say, well, in my electioneering propaganda, look, Oppenheimers own all of these, white, capitalist, reactionary parties, but they don't funding me. So therefore, I'm the only true patriot, or I'm the only true revolutionary, the true vanguard of Black Africans, which is not true because he's just a grifter, commie socialist bastard. But it's electioneering, Byron. I mean, he's right in some ways, but fundamentally wrong in many other ways.
Well, according to Juju, let's not forget, he doesn't actually receive any forms of donations or funding for his political movement. It's all funded by, the poor. You know, the poor, they all live on 350. Apparently, they give him $100 a year. Yeah, I don't buy it. But anyway, regardless of whether or not you buy it, I think it's rather telling that this is the same guy that basically called for the head of Jacob Zuma. And what he's doing is he's repeating, if you recall, he's actually repeating Jacob Zuma's line. So if you recall yourself back to when MK started, Jacob Zuma called for the alignment of the progressive forces. He said he was going to bring together all the progressive forces. And it looks to me like Juju's basically expropriating, without compensation or even acknowledgement, his actual electioneering. And he's using it as his own because he's now saying, yeah, I'm going to create this progressive forces. This always appears to be a problem with communists, Ramon. They all want to kind of lead the pack, but none of them just kind of want to form the pack.
True to a large degree, but if, for example, this is the case, let's say MK gets 5% of the vote and EFF gets 10% of the vote and whatever, ACE gets 1%. Let's say there's like a 20% block of the progressive forces of South Africa. That 20%, I think, can put quite a bit of leverage on the ANC to get its way because the ANC is weak and useless and retarded for the most part. So if that is the case, if 20% of parliament is hardcore communists, we have no option but for the multi-party charter to coalesce in agreements and coalitions with the ANC at a national level. Because that is the only way to stop the onslaught from the hard left and the onslaught of the so-called progressive parties. So we said on this program, ANC plus DA equals good coalition. I think we stand by that. Or have you changed your mind?
No, not really. I still think it would be in the best interest of the country. But remember that it doesn't necessarily actually have to be in an actual coalition. Because one of the things that analysts are slowly but surely starting to, how should we say, starting to come around to is this idea of government and national unity. And I think that is very interesting because you and I both know from certain sources that we have that this is kind of the conversation line that's going on behind closed doors. The reason I find it so interesting is because it was actually a line that was repeated by Holomisa during the UDM elections manifesto launch on the weekend. And he actually said that he was calling on a government and national unity and he was willing to be part of one. So it does look to me like this idea of getting all the, should we say, larger, more influential political parties and kind of clubbing them together for the purposes of saving the country from the progressives looks like it's gaining some kind of attraction, and obviously that's going to include the DA, isn't it?
I mean, if Cyril was really smart, which he isn't, but if he was smart, he would say, listen, ANC got 45%, MPC got 30%, whatever the case might be. Let's have a government of national unity. Come see me at the union buildings. Let's discuss. And then, John Steenhuisen will be forced to go. So will Huma Mashaba. So will the Freedom Front. This is the best opportunity for those parties to be in government. So it'll be checkmate for Cyril because he can just sort of pick and choose his partners at will because he will still have the largest party. So Huma Mashaba, who said he'll never work with the ANC, he's going to have egg on his face if this is actually the case. If Cyril says, come to the union building, let's work together, Herman's going to say no. He's not going to work with the ANC whatsoever. Seems like something that's not going to work terribly well for Action SA. But if Cyril was smart, that's what he would do. And also, what the government of national unity will do is to keep the progressive forces out. If you've got 60% of parliament acting together and then 20% being communist, you can drown those out so easily. But is Cyril smart enough to do this? I don't know.
I mean, the interesting part about this entire thing is that whilst they all discussing the political movement of the MK party and what that might mean to the political landscape of South Africa, a lot of people seem to be forgetting MK party has no leaders. It literally has nominated nobody for positions. We don't even know whose face is going to appear on the ballot because it might even be Jacob Zuma, but he can't run for office. And he's also said, you don't want to run for office. So what exactly is the MK party without Zuma, really? And remember, Zuma's not actually involved. So I don't know, man. Like MK is getting a lot of interest. A lot of people are talking about it. It is getting votes in some parts of the country, as we both well know. Is it a cope in the future? Is it going to be a two-seat party parliament type misnomer party where everybody just shoots each other for fun? I don't know, man. I don't know if the MK party actually has a progressive future.
I'm not too sure either. Jacob Zuma's 81. I'm not too sure they even have the signatures required as yet. That needs to be in by in a week's time, sometime in March, I believe.
Yep.
And if they don't have it, they're not going to be on the ballot paper. So maybe that could be the case in that regard, because new political parties now need to get like thousands of new signatures, which is really
15,000.
good and bad in 15,000. So who knows if MK will even be on the ballot. But if they are on the ballot and if the progressive forces want to work together, the only way Cyril stops them, if he's smart, is a government of national unity that completely shuts them out. And that means Cyril giving power to whiteys and Afrikaners and, other blacks that aren't in the ANC. Is Cyril smart enough to do it? I have my sincere doubts. He's never done anything smart in his life so far. So why will he start now?
Assuming that Cyril's even there after the elections, right? I mean, we've already discussed this, you and I, many times before, and the chances of Cyril getting to the election kind of failing. Remember that the ANC class is failing as not achieving above 50%. That's a really important distinction. Anything above 50% is considered a pass. They're not going to get 50%, man. I mean, all the polling is showing if they do get 50%, it's going to be 50.05%. Like they'll have like 3 votes over the 50% threshold. It's not a big thing. But the majority of the polls also showing us, 45%, in which case they only need a very small coalition of partners that would be ready to work with the ANC, which in theory could actually involve just the IFP, in theory. So, I don't know, man. Like, you look at this going forward and you think to yourself, well, if they get to that point where they don't have the 50%, Cyril will class that as a failure. Will he stick around after his failure or will he leave? A lot of the indications, mate, is he's going to leave. Huh?
And if Cyril does leave, you got Paul Mashatile, who is, has the personality of a prison door. And if Paul Mashatile gets taken out by his corruption claims, you've got who left? Fikile Mbalula. And that's why you should vote for the ANC, because we have reached the zenith of Rita Afghanistan when Fikile Mbalula becomes the president of this country. Then we'll have reached that moment in time where everything coalesces extremely well.
And you may be looking at that and saying that couldn't possibly be the case. But actually, if you look at the weekend, Ramon, the ANC came out and said, as part of their integrity commission, they were saying who was excluded from the ballot. And I don't know if you noticed this, but Paul Mashatile has currently got a question mark next to his name. That's a maybe. So it may very well be the case that he is actually excluded from running in the elections.
Who knows? These elections can't come sooner than we want. Let's wait and see. For now, if anyone's making a prediction, they are going to be wrong. Just understand that there are 100 permutations of what could possibly happen in the next few months. We'll bring all those permutations to you right here on Morning Shot.